a hard-working New Mexico family.
My dad was up at 4 in the morning, wouldn't go down till 10 o'clock at night.
She was always the type of person to just help everybody.
Is murdered on Father's Day.
My parents are dead.
They were covered in so much blood.
That was the worst I've ever seen.
Police uncover a loving family.
He was a shaken baby. We were told he may never walk again.
With a startling criminal connection.
She has a history of burglaries.
And a jaw-dropping revelation.
I absolutely was shocked. I didn't think I have ever known anybody in my life who could do something that brutal.
To this day, I still can't understand how the person could do something this tragic, this gruesome.
They said, I know who did it, I know who did it.
A tiny New Mexico town home to just a few hundred families. A place filled with honest, hardworking people.
It's a very tight-knit community. It's kind of one of those places where everybody knows everybody.
On Father's Day 2011, police receive a 911 call that shatters the early evening calm.
Santa Fe 911, where's your emergency?
Dancing boy! Carl!
Okay, tell me exactly what happened.
I don't know, I just went there and put the ass in the phone. Did you come out and I walked over to check right over the people was in the yard?
Okay. I can't hear you when you're yelling. Try not to yell into the phone, I can't understand you.
My parents are dead.
The caller is a 35-year-old woman named Cherie Ortiz Rios. Officers arrive at the property she shares with her parents, Lloyd and Dixie Ortiz. Police enter the home occupied by Cherie's parents and her brother to investigate, starting with the master bedroom.
Had observed a female laying face down in her nightgown attire, deceased.
The brutality that was involved was unspeakable.
She had some trauma on the right side of her temple region.
Police believe this is Cherie's 53-year-old mother, Dixie Ortiz.
As you walk out through the main door to the bedroom, there's a couple of steps up into a kitchen. That's where a deceased male was laying face down. That was probably the worst I've ever seen. There was several defects in his head and shoulder area.
Cherie tells police that this is the body of her 21-year-old brother, Stephen.
As you walk back out the room to the rear of the residence, there was another deceased male laying face down. And he had several injuries to his upper torso and his head region.
The dead man is Cherie's 58-year-old father, Lloyd. Detectives called in the medical examiner to take charge of the bodies. For now, they can only speculate about the cause and time of death.
There were limitations on how well we could examine the injuries because they were covered in so much blood.
It looked like something that had penetrated all of their bodies. So at that point, led us to believe that they were actually shot with some type of a firearm.
While the medical examiner carefully removes the bodies, a forensics team meticulously looks for evidence.
We did not find any shell casings. There wasn't a gun located. There was nothing that indicated that we had our murder weapon at the scene. We have no physical evidence as far as some type of a fingerprint. There weren't any footwear impressions in any of the blood. Maybe we can get some DNA, but we don't know that initially. That has to be sent to the lab for testing. With this type of crime scene, generally there's only a couple different types of motive. It's love, money, or anger. So we have to look into those. Lloyd's wallet was on the counter right next to where Stephen was lying in the kitchen. It had money in it. It didn't look like somebody was in there to steal from them.
There's no evidence to suggest this is a robbery, so police consider whether other motives could have been at play.
Who would stand to gain something from killing 3 people on Father's Day in their house?
Police need to learn more about the victims and their family. They turn to Cherie, who lives just steps away.
On the 2/3 of the property, Lloyd, Dixie, and their son, Stephen, lived, and the other third was occupied by Lloyd and Dixie's daughter, Cherie, her husband, Jesse, and their 2 children, Catalina and Robert.
When her sister arrives, a despondent Cherie can barely keep it together.
I remember my sister running up to me and telling me, I'm sorry, that my mom and my dad and my brother were dead.
There were nothing I could do or say to make it better for her. 'Cause I love my sister so much, so much.
Cherie and Angela choke back tears as they tell police all about the most important people in their lives.
My mom and dad were the best parents that I could ever ask for. They were always there, always accepted us for who we were, always stood by our side, no matter what.
Lloyd was a tile contractor who was popular in the town.
My dad was amazing. Up at 4 a.m, wouldn't go down till probably 10 o'clock at night every day.
Lloyd had been married to Dixie for 34 years. She worked in a nursing home.
She didn't even think of that as being a job. It was just who she was.
Dixie's selfless, caring manner didn't stop with her work. In 1989, when their daughters were just teens, she and Lloyd took in a baby in need.
Stephen was 7 months old when he came into our home as a foster child. He was a shaken baby. His left side of the body was paralyzed. He had cerebral palsy. We were told that he may never walk, talk.
I would grab him out of the crib and stick him right next to me in bed, and he would sleep right next to me. I just loved him so much.
As he grew, the family's love helped transform Stephen into a strong and happy little boy.
Walking, potty training, the developmental milestones, they took a lot longer for him to reach, but he reached every single one of them.
Stephen was part of our church, and he was such an absolute joy. He would greet everybody. Everybody in church loved him. He made it a point to talk to everybody. He was quite a young man.
Stephen, Lloyd, and Dixie's lives have been cut tragically short. But why would someone murder such a loving family? Police find one possible reason: growing outside.
There were several marijuana plants that were being grown. There was a fenced-off area where there was 17 plants growing.
These plants were not visible unless you were directly over them. It was a very tight oxygen area that was padlocked.
A marijuana crop under lock and key outside the family home piqued detectives' interest. Had they just uncovered an illegal drug operation?
My parents had a medical marijuana card for my brother and a grower's license. So they were legally growing medical marijuana for my brother.
My brother had 2 brain surgeries to relieve some of the pressure in his brain, and so they prescribed medical marijuana to him to help relieve the headaches he was having. They were pretty debilitating at times.
The family had known that Lloyd was growing the marijuana for Stephen, and the family would smoke some of the marijuana.
While the marijuana was being grown legally, detectives suspect that it could have attracted the attention of the wrong people.
Was this some type of a drug-related incident?
Police become even more concerned when Cherie and her husband Jesse relay a story about a few suspicious characters they heard outside their home on the night of the murder.
They indicated that they were watching a movie that ended between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the morning. Their dog started barking, and Jesse got up and walked to the front window. He saw a car that was parked outside.
He heard a kid yelling out there. He heard somebody say, "Hurry up, come on." And he was like, "There's somebody out there." And so he went back in and even grabbed a gun. And he got in his truck and he drove his truck toward that car.
Coming up, the autopsy reveals an unexpected cause of death.
It's not generally your weapon of choice. It's extremely violent, it's brutal.
And the town is stunned when the killer is revealed.
People were in disbelief. As a pastor, it was hard for me to even fathom.
Hours after Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen Ortiz are found dead, Police are hunting for the driver of a car seen outside the home the night before the murders.
We interviewed Lloyd and Dixie's daughter, Cherie, and she said that her husband, Jesse, saw a car that was parked outside and to the left of the property. He had indicated that the vehicle was a gray car.
The dog started barking crazy. My husband, Jesse, he came out and even got in his truck.
Cherie tells police Jesse followed the vehicle in his truck. But when detectives interview Jesse, he tells them a completely different story.
In Jesse's interview, he had failed to mention that he actually left the house that evening.
You never left the house?
No.
Why would your wife say you left the house?
That I left the house.
Why would she say that?
Maybe because I was outside or something.
She said she heard you leave the house. Why would she say that?
I don't know.
It was pretty concerning that he would forget one of the biggest details of that evening with his involvement.
As detectives continue to press Jesse, he suddenly remembers details from the night before.
Jesse.
You know what? I might have left the house. When I seen the car parked. You know what? That is correct. That is correct.
You see the issue?
Yeah, I do. I forgot about that.
It's something you don't just forget about, Jesse.
Well, I'm serious, man.
Man to man. You know where I'm going. Right. It's time to start talking.
I did. I do remember, because I remember going back down there to get my keys. And I did get in my truck. And I drove towards the dead end that way.
What happened then?
I passed by.
Why would you not confront somebody right there?
Because I didn't expect anything.
Jesse, lying to me, dude.
I'm not lying to you, bro. I'm telling you the truth.
Jesse's changing story now has police eyeing him as a suspect. And when they ask him about his relationship with his in-laws, they think they may have hit upon a motive.
We found out something very alarming. There was some stuff in the close past that had caused some family tension between Lloyd and Jesse. And we knew at one point Lloyd was embarrassed of the way that Cherie and Jesse's property looked, so he actually built a fence in between the two properties so he didn't have to look at it anymore. So we knew there was some tension there.
Police can't rule out that tension in the family could have boiled over. Could Jesse have slipped out of the house and committed 3 heinous murders over a minor family squabble? To get to the truth, police grilled the couple about where they were the night of the murder.
They told us the timeline of where they were. They went to a casino. They were there for X amount of time, drove to their residence. They put in a movie right away. They were able to identify almost minute for minute of what they did that entire day, which is kind of unusual.
And when police ask Cherie about finding the bodies, she tearfully gives them a detailed account of the horror that unfolded.
And I walked in and I was like, Mom. And then I walked over to her to shake her, and her head was blown. And so I ran to the kitchen to check for my brother and my dad, and I thought it was my dad laying on the floor in his underwear because his face was so blown off. And so I ran home screaming for my husband. And my husband went back and he said, honey, that's Stephen in the kitchen. Your dad's dead in the backyard.
Cherie's story is plausible, but one thing she can't explain is something she told police when she called 911.
They're dead. They have gunshot wounds to the head. They're dead. They've been dead since the morning.
Cherie said that she knew if she would have went over there, she could have saved him that morning, which told me that she had intimate knowledge of when the homicides actually occurred, which pretty concerning. How would she know that? We didn't know that timeline of when they were actually killed.
Detectives are no longer suspicious of just Jesse. Is it possible that the Ortiz's own daughter could be involved as well?
We did obtain DNA samples from Cherie and Jesse to try and analyze to see if there was anything that could be matched.
Police searched Cherie and Jesse's home, hoping to find a physical link to the murder. With so much activity in the tiny town of El Rancho, news of the crime spreads.
My wife and I raced down to the property. When we had got there, there was quite a few people there. Cherie was just outside herself. She was just hysterical.
Detectives can't help but wonder if Cherie's tears are genuine, yet they're unable to find any physical evidence to link Cherie or Jesse to the murders. When the autopsy report comes back the next day, they hope the results will help them shed some light on the mystery.
I actually did attend the autopsy, and during the course of the autopsy, the pathologist informed us that the wounds sustained were the result of impact trauma. They were killed with a pickaxe. Stephen Ortiz, the son of Lloyd and Dixie, received 17 blows to the head from the pickaxe. Evidently, the victims were beaten long after they were already deceased.
The amount of force that was used to cause this was extreme. My initial reaction was, who had this much anger to want to kill him in such a gruesome manner?
After receiving the autopsy report on a horrific triple homicide in El Rancho, New Mexico, detectives have just discovered that the Ortiz family was killed with a pickaxe. Now that police know what to look for, they quickly set out to find the murder weapon.
One of the agents remembers seeing a Maddox-style pickaxe lying in an adjacent field to the west of the residence. So we immediately went to the scene and found our pickaxe covered in blood. Processed it to the crime scene lab in Santa Fe and waited for results.
There was a lot of hope that there was going to be potential evidence that would link the assailant to the pickaxe.
There was nothing. There was nothing there. We got DNA that was identified on the pickaxe from the 3 victims. Nobody else.
Still, the murder weapon does tell police something about the killer.
It would take a great deal of force to cause that type of injury.
Police had to consider whether either of their suspects were strong enough to commit the crime. Jesse was capable. Was Cherie? While police search for answers, the small town of El Rancho is gripped with fear.
The whole community was on high alert. This kind of crime is very unusual for that area.
All we knew was that there were 3 dead people that the community loved, and nobody knew why and how.
Police continue to look into the alibis of the main suspects, Cherie Ortiz and her husband Jesse Rios, who said they'd been to a casino that night. Investigators see if their story can be verified.
They were seen on surveillance video at a gas station, and then they went to a casino.
This supports the couple's claims. Investigators also track what they did the rest of the evening.
We were able to pinpoint the length of time that it would take to drive from the casino to their house.
The timeline puts them in their home, right next door to the murders, at the time of the crime. But it's not nearly enough evidence to pursue a case. Police hope to utilize the publicity surrounding the murders and make an appeal for tips.
Everybody wanted to say who they thought it was, but didn't have any merit behind any of the stuff they were coming forward with.
Detectives also combed through their witness interviews and hit on a name they hadn't considered before.
Initially, Angela had mentioned that Nicholas Ortiz was a 16-year-old, just a regular kid in the community. Cherie had a son that was Nicholas's age, and they went to school together.
Nick Ortiz had a positive relationship with the family. There's no relation, by the way, between Nick Ortiz and the 3 Ortizes who were victim. It's just same last name.
Nicholas's family lived right up the road from us, and that's how him and my son had become friends.
He was having some troubles at home. Eventually, my sister opened up her home to him, gave him his own room.
He would go over next door to Lloyd and Dixie's house, They would give him money, they took him to the flea market, they took him everywhere. So they basically just treated him like he was one of the family.
But the transition to family member wasn't all smooth.
My husband and I had caught Nicholas going through our drawers. We had just started noticing a little bit of money missing. Things moved. So we started giving him an allowance every week for the chores he was doing as well.
Nick's troubles extended to school, too.
Nick had come home from school, and you could tell he had been punched in the face and was kind of beat up. I freaked out. Oh my God, who did this to you? He said, I joined a gang with some friends of mine, and I had to let them beat me up. And I was like, okay, so now today we're going to have the anti-gang talk. And I mean, we did.
The family tells police that joining a gang was just one example of the problems Nick brought to their home.
One night, my father had asked my son to cut down a plum tree that was dead in his backyard. And when they went out there, Nick was hiding behind some raised flower beds they had in their backyard. And the backyard was a secured area for the 2 little dogs they had, so both gates were locked from the inside. So he had to have jumped the fence to get back there.
Nick basically jumped up and kind of went towards him, in a joking manner, like to scare him. And Lloyd wasn't impressed by it. He didn't think it was funny.
After stealing from the family and joining a gang, this was the final straw for Lloyd.
He basically told Nick that he was not welcome at that property ever again.
It made us feel on guard and very uncomfortable, and we think it's best that it's time for him to move back home. I then text Nicholas and told him that he could come and pick up all the clothing and furniture that we had purchased for him over that time period, and he could take it home with him. I never really saw him again after that.
Could the Ortiz's rejection of Nicholas lead him to kill? Had he murdered Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen in cold-blooded revenge? The police bring in Nick for questioning.
Do you know anything about this case?
Police in El Rancho, New Mexico have a new suspect in the murders of Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen Ortiz. An unrelated 16-year-old named Nicholas Ortiz.
Do you know anything about this case that could help us?
I don't. The only thing that I've heard is what people have told me from the news.
He came off as this calm kid that didn't do anything wrong. He was just kind of like your baseline kid.
Detectives confront Nicholas about his speedy exit from the Ortiz home.
Lloyd just told you. What exactly did he say? You remember?
Yeah. Telling me that I effed up my trust with them, not to go near them anymore or anything. I said, okay, fine. So what you guys want to do? And that was really the last time we spoke.
Okay. How did you feel then?
The detectives ask where he was the night of the murder.
He said he was at home with his dad and sisters leading up to Father's Day. Between 12 and 1 o'clock, he woke his father up and wished him a happy Father's Day and went back to bed. And he was there when his mom got off of work, which was around 7:30 in the morning. Everything was corroborated as far as his alibi.
Not only does Nicholas have a solid alibi, his demeanor in the interview doesn't suggest he is the killer.
Do you think if you found out who did that?
If I found out who did it, I would call the police right away.
Police find people in the community who vouch for Nick.
Nicholas was part of our congregation. He was very, very gentlemanlike. He was kind. He was willing to help. He would stay late sometimes and help us pick up after the church.
Police cross Nicholas Ortiz off the suspect list. Then, 2 days after the murder, they get an urgent call from Cherie Ortiz.
I called the police and I told them we found out about a safe that was well hidden, enough where my sister and I didn't even know it existed, at my parents' house. My Uncle Walter had called me and said, I built your dad a secret piece of furniture that would hide a safe in it.
The unit was so well concealed, the police had not found it when they searched the house days earlier.
I said, I do not want to know any more until we contact the police. So we had to have it opened up there at the police station.
Inside was $80,000 in cash, as well as some of the life insurance paperwork.
That's when we found that my dad had been saving money for years. He had his retirement saved in there.
Cherie says she didn't know about the money, but police make a discovery that puts her claim in doubt.
We had learned through district court that the power of attorney had been given to Cherie at this point, and she was basically going to be the heir of hundreds of thousands of dollars in life insurance policies that Lloyd and Dixie had. And that $80,000 that was in the safe was part of a cash out from those life insurance policies.
Cherie says she didn't know about the insurance policy. The inheritance was large enough to give Cherie and Jesse a powerful motive for murder. But motive alone wasn't enough to arrest either one of them.
We have no physical evidence that could tie Cherie and Jesse to the crime.
The discovery of the safe also causes police to speculate on how the Ortizes had amassed so much money. Could it have anything to do with the marijuana growing on the property?
Kind of raised some concern to us as to why he was growing it. Are they possibly selling this stuff?
Detectives investigate whether Lloyd was secretly involved in trafficking. The answer comes back clear.
Nothing was taken from this house. It didn't even appear that whoever was there at the time knew that there was pot plants being grown behind this fence. And knowing anything about the industry of marijuana, there were smaller plants, they weren't mature. We were able to pretty much rule out that the gangs were tied in to this.
It's another blow for the investigation. And as days turn to weeks, detectives are no closer to catching those responsible.
Essentially, you do run out of leads or you run into dead ends. As frustrating as it was for us as investigators, it had to have been exponentially worse for the family.
I was on the phone with the police every single day asking, what have they heard? Anything new? What can I do to help? And we were always told, nothing. There's nothing you can do.
I truly felt like they were not ever going to solve this case.
Then, 16 months after the murders, detectives get the break they've been praying for when they receive a call from the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Department.
In October of 2012, I had just gotten home from work and I got a call that there's somebody there that wants to give some information to me in reference to the homicide. And she was in jail. She said she just wants to get something off her chest.
A new tip will finally help solve the murders of Lloyd, Dixie, and Stephen Ortiz. The information comes from a young woman in the custody of Santa Fe police.
Ashley Ball was 24, and she has a history of burglaries and of drug use.
Ashley told officers that she knew something about the El Rancho murders. At that point, ears started to perk within law enforcement.
Before questioning Ashley, police look into her background.
Ashley grew up in El Rancho.
Ashley wasn't necessarily a troubled teen per se, but she got in trouble a lot.
From a young age was in and out of the detention center.
Lead detective Craig Bobnock questions Ashley about what she knows.
As I started explaining that it was a voluntary interview, she kept interrupting me saying, I know who did it, I know who did it.
Ashley claims that on the night of the murder, she was smoking weed with her cousin, Jose Roybal, and a mutual friend.
They needed money, so they were gonna go hit the Ortiz's house. And I took them, I dropped them off, and I went back home.
She told me that she owned a gray 1997 Saturn car, two-door car, during the time of the homicide. So I immediately thought of Jesse's statement.
Cherie Ortiz's husband, Jesse Rios, had told police he saw a gray car driving slowly past their house late on the night of the murder. But it's what Ashley says next that grabs detectives' attention.
I got a call about maybe half an hour, 45 minutes later.
The call was from Jose's friend, and he needed a ride.
He got in my car. He had blood on his pants. He had a trash bag tied around his right foot. That's when he told me that he killed Stephen, Dixie, and Lloyd. He said he threw the pickaxe by the fence. He kept saying he killed him, he messed up, he killed him.
Ashley told me that the single person that killed the Ortiz family was Nick Ortiz.
Ashley's revelation is explosive. This family took in Nick when he was having trouble at home.
He stayed there for upwards of a couple of months, in which he got very close with the family. He would eat there, he would get off the school bus there. It was basically his home, and they took him in.
But police need to be sure Ashley's telling the truth. After all, she has a rap sheet, and their suspect has an alibi.
The information that Ashley Roybal provided had to have come from somebody who was actually there during the incident.
Ashley explains another detail that puts her at the scene.
Do they wear gloves? Do they care about fingerprints usually?
He had a sock on his hand.
He did have a sock on his hand?
Mm-hmm.
Police are hopeful they can find evidence in Ashley's car, but it's nowhere to be found.
It's 18 months later. She had said she had sold it to a tow company. The vehicle ultimately ended up at the shredder. Couldn't find it.
Investigators had to find another way to verify her story.
I received a lot of the phone logs, and that was my big piece of evidence at this point.
Cell phone records show the communication between Nicholas, Ashley, and her cousin Jose peaked around the time of the murders, so investigators immediately bring Nick back in to confront him with the evidence.
So I brought Nick in. He's in 100% denial of everything until I bring up the phone records.
I'm just going to show you, these are your texts between you and Jose. You're the orange and he's the white. That's how much you guys texted on Saturday night into Sunday morning. Is it surprising?
Well, with all due respect to you guys and all that, I'd really like to just stop talking and go home now.
Okay.
I want another chance at another interview with him, so I didn't want to ruin it. So we ended the interview.
Investigators' next move is to haul in Jose for questioning. Since he's a minor, they get permission from his parents to speak to him.
He was 15 at the time. He drank a lot. He had problems at home. He didn't have a good reputation.
Police talk to Jose, and he opens up.
Ashley dropped me and Nick off so we could go around the house. She left. Nick told me he would go in. He wanted me to go in with him to go kill him. And I told him no. I didn't want to. I was scared. He started walking towards the house. When he started walking towards the house, I ran to the river. I got to my house. And then Ashley and Nick show up. Nick is white as a ghost. I knew he had did it. He told me he had did it. He told me he did it.
Jose's story matches Ashley's, and suddenly police have two witnesses against Nicholas.
On February 12th, 2015, I got the approval from the district attorney to get an arrest warrant for Nick Ortiz. District court judge signed it and said, go pick him up.
Just like before, Nicholas remains uncooperative.
So I brought him in a copy of the criminal complaint. There were 5 total charges on the criminal complaint that I gave him. He said, I don't agree with 2 of these charges on here. And there were only 2 charges that were different from murder. So it's an admission to me. I knew I had him at that point. It was him.
With Nicholas taken into custody, detectives finally have some news for the Ortiz family.
I absolutely was shocked when the police said he had done this. I didn't think I have ever known anybody in my life who could do something like that brutal. I've never met anybody that could hurt people so grossly. It didn't make sense because that was not at all his personality when he lived with us.
People were in disbelief. As a pastor, it was hard for me to even fathom the fact that a young man like this could do something so tragic, this gruesome.
On June 15th, 2015, Nicholas goes to trial for massacring the Ortiz family.
Nick was a minor at the time. Given the fact that this was a heinous triple homicide, the judge did agree with my office that Nicholas should be charged as an adult.
When the trial starts, the prosecution is confident of a conviction until an unexpected development jeopardizes the whole case.
So in the middle of trial, we received a big surprise in Jose changing his testimony completely.
Nicholas Ortiz alone stands accused of a savage triple murder. His two former friends are taking plea bargains to testify against him. But just as prosecutors think it's a cut and dry case, the unexpected happens.
So in the middle of trial, we received a big surprise in Jose changing his testimony completely, pointing at Ashley as the individual who instructed them to kill the family.
Originally, the plan was to rob the Ortiz family, but according to Jose, Ashley had something more sinister in mind.
Jose Roybal testified that Ashley said, "Why don't you just kill them?"
It's a stunning statement, which the defense denies.
The case agent said, "Well, she said she didn't say that." And then the lawyer said, "Yeah, but Jose Roybal says she did, so somebody must be lying." Jose testified that Ashley gave the two boys socks to cover up their hands and plastic bags with Kleenex in them to cover up their feet so that they wouldn't leave traces there. He also said that she is the one that handed Nick the weapon.
According to Jose, in the early hours of June 19th, 2011, Ashley tells Nicholas and Jose it's time to put her unthinkable plan into action.
Ashley takes Jose and Nick to the Ortiz house, drops them off.
Jose got scared. He left. He ran home. Nick went towards the house.
He knocks on the back door. Lloyd Ortiz gets up out of bed. When he opens it, he's attacked by Nicholas with the pickaxe.
He didn't stop there. He went into the house and struck Dixie twice in her temple on the right side of her head with the pickaxe.
Nicholas moved on to the kitchen looking for the money, but he found Stephen instead.
Recognizing who is in his house, Stephen puts up a fight.
Nick delivers 17 blows to his head and body and kills him.
After Nick killed the three Ortizes, he didn't take anything. He got scared, so he just left. He walked out the door and called Ashley.
The revelations come as a shock to the victim's family.
Every day that we were at that trial, it was devastating because we learned things. I learned things that I didn't know. And I wish I hadn't, because it still haunts me.
Nick doesn't say a thing during the entire trial. It's Jose's word against Ashley's. How would their competing testimonies affect the jury?
The case was based almost entirely on Ashley and Jose's testimony, and that was a point of contention amongst people up until the sentencing.
After 3.5 days, I remember the jury went into the courtroom and the foreperson said, we're just no matter how much time you give us, we're just not going to come to a consensus. So the judge had no choice but to declare a mistrial.
It was horrible. It was devastating to me.
I felt like our hearts had been ripped out. We had all this hope.
Luckily, we have the opportunity to try him again, which we did.
17 months later, in December 2016, the case goes back to court.
Luckily, this time around, we proved to all 12 jurors that Nicholas Ortiz was the individual that killed those 3 people.
On October 28, 2019, Nicholas is sentenced to 25 years in prison. The victory rings hollow for the victims' loved ones.
What that felt like to me was each victim, my mom, my dad, and my brother, was only worth 8 years each. That's exactly what that is. It's a joke. That's not justice.
He's gonna do probably 12 to 15 years. No way. No way.
Ashley Roybal received a 20-year sentence. 6 years of that was suspended, so 14 years of incarceration.
Jose got full immunity for his testimony. He never got so much as probation.
Even though years have passed since the murders, their effects remain.
I would say I'm sorry to my parents and my brother. I'm sorry I wasn't there to help you. So I would say I love you and I miss you and I'm so sorry.
I want them to be remembered through their compassion.
Do you remember that night? They called. It said that Stacy hadn't got to work.
There's already an aerial search going on.
They found Stacy on the side of a road and a bunch of wildflowers.
Instead of going to Stacy's wedding, now we're going to Stacy's memorial.
She's buried in her wedding dress.
She was really excited about getting married. She really loved Jimmy.
She told me that she wasn't very excited to get married because she was sleeping with a black guy named Rodney. Wow, you need to be careful with this.
They found that Rodney Reed's DNA is identical to the DNA recovered from Stacy Stites' body.
Am I being charged with something?
If Rodney Reed did have a relationship with Stacy Stites, doesn't that complicate your case?
He was a black male having sex with a white girl.
I knew my son had been railroaded. I got to fight these people to save my son's life.
Free Rodney Reed! Free Rodney Reed!
Bastrop, it's a typical small Texas town on the Colorado. It's a town that represents a wide swath of what Texas is all about. Certainly the churches, football on Friday nights.
All Bears, Bastrop led 76-9. That is not a typo, folks.
I grew up here. My dad grew up here. My grandparents grew up here. Louisiana has a town named after the same guy that's called Bastrop, but we say Bastrop.
I'm a fifth-generation Bastropian. Bastrop is known as the home of the Lost Pines.
It's an old town, and there's a lot of history. Bastrop was founded by immigrants from the southern United States. They brought enslaved African Americans with them.
In the days of segregation, we as African Americans provided jobs for one another. We had our own barbershops, restaurants. The class of 1970 was the first fully integrated class in Bastrop High School.
In the mid-90s, even at that period of time, the African Americans and the whites were, I think, separated in a lot of ways.
Interracial dating in Bastrop in the 90s existed, but it was something that was hidden and it was dangerous. We've come a long way in some instances, but yet and still, justice is slow in Bastrop County for African Americans.
This morning, 19-year-old Stacey Lee Stites was reported missing.
Family members came from all corners of Texas to comfort Carol Stites. She lost her youngest, Stacey Lee.
She had her plans, and now somebody's taken that away. I think you just about got it. Where am I?
You're in the far end now.
Yes, yeah.
Gravity hold.
There you go. Yep. It's been 24 years since you lost your daughter, Stacey. Yeah. Tell me a little bit about Stacey. Stacey was your youngest of 5. I found out that I was pregnant with Stacey, and I had cancer at the same time. And so I put off any drugs or any chemicals to keep that child alive until I had her, because that soul was more precious to me than mine. From the time she was able to move, she was up and at 'em. She was like the white tornado. That's exactly what they called her when she was little. She was into everything and did everything and friends with everybody.
I was friends with Stacey in high school. We were involved in some church groups and sports together. She was just kind of like a sunflower, sunshine. She was funny. She was always cracking jokes. She didn't really take a lot of things seriously. She was always in the moment. She was looking for what everybody does, young love.
Go away.
Stacey lost her father as a child, and apparently it had quite an impact on her. According to friends and family, she seemed to lose her way for a while.
She ended up pregnant.
She was 15.
Yes, devastating. It took 2 of my daughters to get me in a room upstairs by myself to let me know what had gone on.
She did decide to give the baby up for adoption. Every year, Smithville has their jamboree. That's where Stacey met Jimmy Fennell.
He was on duty at the festival, security. And they got to talking, and they talked, and they talked, and they talked. Pretty soon, he was hanging around the house, and they talked and talked.
What did you think of him?
I like Jimmy. He was raised in the church that I was raised in. He's had the same values that I was raised with. I thought he was heaven sent. This guy was here, and it was just about everything that I wanted in a son-in-law.
She was more outgoing, he was a little more conservative, but I thought he was good for her.
That's the picture of her and him. That was at his graduation when he became a policeman.
Jimmy began working for the Giddings Police Department.
Stacey was very excited about their relationship.
Stacey moved in with Jimmy in his apartment upstairs, and Carol lived in the same building downstairs, catty corner to Stacey and Jimmy's apartment.
They moved in together and they said, "We're engaged, we're getting married." So that was just about, okay, at least you're getting married. You're not going to live in sin, as I would think of it.
It was going to be a big wedding. She was so excited. She had planned every detail.
Here's the thing for the Georgetown Church of Christ, the fees and the use of the church facilities.
Yeah. She was wanting to make more money for her wedding. She went into HED's grocery company, and they gave her a job.
in the produce department. And so Stacy had to be at work early in the morning. She was working hard. Every 2 weeks when she got paid, she was making a payment on the wedding dress.
There was excitement in the beginning, but I think as every day kind of ticked by, it was less and less. I know that it was definitely stressful for her just because she had to work and come home, and she was expected to do laundry, clean. For a 19-year-old, that's kind of a big transition.
Does she share any concerns?
She didn't share any concerns. That she was really excited about getting married. She really loved Jimmy.
You were a little concerned, you were a little emotional before the wedding.
Stress.
And that you cried a couple of times. You thought that Jimmy wasn't quite as...
I was the mother, and Stacy was my daughter, and I expected him to perform the way I wanted him to.
My name is Athena, and we were besties, high school. This is going back in time. Oh, wow. Stacy called me and told me that she's getting engaged and getting married. And Stacy never sounded like a giddy girl in love. She sounded giddy about her wedding and planning her wedding and making things for her wedding. But she never talked about Jimmy.
I think that she started seeing sides of Jimmy that he was very possessive, and it was kind of his way or no way. And I don't know that she was necessarily comfortable with that, so I think that they started butting heads.
Tell me, Carol, when you got the call.
HEB's called. It said that Stacy hadn't got to work.
That's the first inkling that something is wrong.
We didn't know what to do. We made flyers and started walking door to door, hoping that we could find her alive.
Tell me about that night before April 22nd. Do you remember that night?
It was normal, everyday evening stuff. This voice that I've heard all my year, and it makes me sound a little nuts, and I call it the Holy Spirit, all my life that I've had guide me. It said, you did a good job, and your job is done. How do you tell your daughter that the thoughts in your mind was, if you was to die today, I can never be more proud of you? How do you tell that to someone?
We know that Jimmy Fennell was at Little League practice from around 5 in the evening on April 22nd, 1996. At around 8 o'clock p.m., Carol saw Jimmy come home from Little League practice.
Carol actually saw Jimmy and Stacy meet outside and have sort of an embrace outside her window. Of course, she lives downstairs. And she saw Stacy walking with Jimmy, laughing and joking as they went up the stairs to their apartment.
The last words out of her mouth was, Mom, I love you. And I said, I know you do.
The narrative that Jimmy provides is that the two of them are basically home for a good part of the evening, and they're sort of getting along great, and that then she goes to bed, he stays up and watches some TV.
We knew from Jimmy, her fiance, Stacy Stites left her home at approximately 3 a.m. like she always did, to go to a 3:30 a.m. shift at the HEB to work in produce. She drove Jimmy's truck, as she often did. Her normal route to work was on Highway 21 through Bastrop.
Andrew Cardenas is a co-worker of hers, and he's there in the parking lot waiting for Stacy to arrive. Stacy never does. And Stacy's not one to be late for work. And that's the first inkling that something is wrong.
They found a red truck in Bastrop by the high school. At about 5:23 that morning, a patrol officer had come across it. He didn't know that it had any relevance to anything. He called it into dispatch just because it was at the high school. It didn't register as stolen.
He was advised that the truck was owned by Fennell. He basically was able to look inside the truck. It was securely locked. The ignition was intact. There was nothing overtly wrong that he knew about. And so he just went on his way and continued his patrol.
Then as darkness shifts to daybreak, that innocent-looking truck becomes a little more suspicious.
Roughly an hour later, around about 6:45 in the morning, Carol Stites gets a phone call from the grocery store wondering where Stacy is. She hasn't shown up.
Stacy was always on time.
Did you suspect something was wrong immediately?
No, I thought maybe his truck broke down or something. I immediately turned around and called Jimmy. I said, Jimmy, Stacy didn't make it to H-E-B's. And he says, okay, I'll be down in just a minute.
He's getting dressed, he's tucking in his shirt. She notices that he looks like he's just woke up. She grabbed the keys, she handed them to Jimmy so that he could go look for Stacy.
My name is David Board. I worked as a detective for the Bastrop Police Department at the time of Stacy Stites' disappearance. I received a call of a missing person. Stacy Stites had left Giddings, Texas, and was en route to work at H-E-B in Bastrop and never made it.
When the call comes in that Stacy's didn't make it to work, then dispatch and the patrol officer had sort of a uh-oh moment, and they went back.
Her pickup truck was at the Bastrop High School. So I responded there. I remember there was a belt. A part of a leather belt was located outside the truck.
Now we've got a missing person, and we've got the car that she was supposedly driving that morning. So we're gonna put these together. They impound the truck.
Once Jimmy Fennell, Stacy's fiancé, unlocks that truck for investigators, they ask him to take a look and point out anything that seems unusual.
Detective Ed Sommel of the Bastrop Police Department stated that Jimmy pointed out a piece of green-colored plastic. Jimmy stated that it was part of a glass that Stacy drank out of, and that it was not in the truck broken like that before. Jimmy then pointed out one of the tennis shoes that was lying on the passenger floorboard. Jimmy pointed out that one of Stacy's earrings was on the passenger side floorboard.
There were body fluids in the floorboard of that truck. Didn't really know exactly what it was or what caused it, but it was unusual. There was evidence of a struggle at the truck. We suspected foul play.
The police chief questions Jimmy and says that he's visibly shaken and very concerned, but not in a state of panic. Then Jimmy identifies that belt found outside the truck as Stacy's, and that's when he breaks down. Then he goes home to be with Stacy's mom, Carol, to wait.
Since her truck was found, she was nowhere around. The Texas Ranger, Rocky Wardlow, was contacted. We went up in the helicopter, searched all over Bastrop.
What was going through your mind, Crystal, all day?
Hoping that we could find her alive, but still have dread.
Stacy's body isn't discovered until about 3:30 that afternoon, alongside of a dirt road, kind of out in the county. There was a fella who was out there for an appointment, and he had stopped to pick his wife wildflowers because it was the spring in Texas, and then he found her body.
It had to be devastating.
What?
It was awful.
It was awful.
And then, as unbelievable as it may sound in this small town, just 2 weeks after Stacy's body is discovered, a second young woman is found dead in the woods.
The citizens of Bastrop were believing they may have a serial killer on the loose.
they found Stacy on the side of a road and a bunch of wildflowers.
It had to be devastating.
It was.
It was awful. It was awful. My memory of that is my mom just sitting in her chair, just, my baby, my baby, my baby, my baby.
We had a bridal shower just a couple of days before she died. And all the bridal stuff was still sitting on my dining room table.
How did you even process that?
The pastor from the church is the one who told me. And my question to him was, how could God let this happen? Things happen. You know, this is the devil's world.
When the DPS crime lab arrives, this is an impressive vehicle that comes down this dirt road in the middle of a pine forest. Exiting were photographers, serologists, physical evidence collection people. This was quite a unique crew to show up in this little sleepy county of Bastrop.
Stacy's body is kind of almost 10 to 12 feet off of the road in the high grass. She's laying on her back, and in between her legs there's her name tag for the HEB. And she is missing a shoe from the foot that we found the shoe in the truck. That seems to be the shoe that she's missing. The interesting thing about that is her sock that's revealed underneath is completely clean, so it doesn't look like Stacy walked to this location. It looks like she was carried to this location and placed, meaning dumping a body.
The way she was clothed, what she'd been doing, how her zipper was broken from being pulled apart, about all of the things that told us this was a classic rape case.
There was what appeared to be the mate of that black woven belt that was found in the high school parking lot, laying on the side of the road. So this scene is now tying to the high school parking lot.
It was a braided leather belt that had been busted. It would appear to me that it was leather, and that for it to break, it would have had to have a tremendous amount of force pulling on it. It was enough force on that belt around Stacy Stites' neck to kill her. Stacy Stites was strangled to death.
The only prints that they were able to lift from the inside of the truck that were readable prints were Stacy's and Jimmy's. And yet, since that was his truck, his fingerprint being in that truck is not evidence of him perpetrating the crime.
Jimmy Fennell was absolutely considered as a suspect. Anytime a woman is murdered, the significant other is and should be one of the prime suspects.
Around the time of Stacy's death, another woman by the name of Mary Ann Alt was also found dead. A man named David Lawhon had confessed to her killing, and there was some talk that he might have been responsible for Stacy's death.
We knew about that case, and I know that it was definitely a consideration that there might have been a serial murderer up there.
There are some similarities between the Stacy Stites case and the Mary Ann case. Mary Ann Alt is a little bit older than Stacy Stites, but in both a truck is used, and in both a body is dumped, and in both a earring is an important piece of evidence.
David Lawhon had bragged about killing Stacy, and so David Lawhon became a suspect in Stacy Stites' murder. However, David Lawhon was excluded pretty quickly because the DNA from Stacy's murder did not match.
David Lawhon is convicted of that second murder, but still no arrests in Stacy's case, and her devastated family is mourning her loss.
Stacy's funeral was there in Bastrop. It was standing room only.
The police set up a camera, a secret camera, to provide surveillance of the ceremony that's taking place. They're trying to surreptitiously capture people's emotions, people's reactions.
I remember walking around and thinking, did the person that killed Stacy, did they come to her funeral?
There are very few murders in Bastrop. a sleepy little Southeast Texas town.
Broken wings.
And this one to be a young girl who went to high school, played sports, was active in her church. This would be the last person most people would believe would be involved in a crime.
There are 32 HEB employees from Austin helping out at this Bastrop store, a small favor they feel for fellow workers trying to cope with a traumatic experience.
Very sad for what happened.
Almost all of the more than 100 workers from this store are attending the memorial service for Stacey Stites.
At the church, at the funeral, the police placed 2 camcorders in strategic locations. The camcorder that is placed in a box with a hole cut in the box. It's placed like that so that you can't tell that it's a video recording device. 4 days after this crime, they don't have any direct leads on anybody. And so they're looking for anything that seems out of the ordinary, anything that looks like it might point to a suspect.
We were supposed to be getting together for a wedding in a few weeks. Instead of going to Stacey's wedding, now we're going to Stacey's memorial.
It was devastating to all of us, including Jimmy. He was definitely a man who had just lost his fiancée.
Jimmy went over to the coffin and he had the wedding ring in his hand and he put the wedding ring on her finger.
Told her goodbye.
Yeah, told her goodbye. It was devastating. And she's buried with that wedding ring, and she's buried in her wedding dress. And she worked hard for that wedding dress, and we all decided that that's what she should be buried in.
There was a graveside service, and what seemed unusual to me at that service was just that Jimmy, her fiance, really didn't show a lot of emotion at all.
Of course, everybody grieves in their own way. Now today, Stacey's mother and sisters say they have always believed that Jimmy was innocent. But at the time, Stacey's sister Crystal was so concerned about Jimmy's behavior that she hired a private investigator and even made a list of his questionable behavior.
You kind of want to suspect the people nearest to her, and then you try to figure it out in your head of what happened and how did it happen. But once we knew that she had been raped, our emotions were like, it had to be somebody else.
We did not believe that Jimmy had hurt Stacey at all.
In fact, Jimmy himself even later talked about the pain he was feeling over Stacey's death.
It's going to be with me forever. I'll think about it. It'll be there. There's no way it's going to go away.
So Karen Blakely was the lead DNA analyst who processed the crime scene. She makes a telephone call to Rocky Wardlow, the lead investigator on the case. Karen Blakely told him the semen was deposited at the same time as the death. Essentially, she told him the rape happened at the same time Stacey died. It meant that Rocky Wardlow had the smoking gun. It meant that all he needed to do was to find the depositor of the semen. He is simply looking for a DNA match.
Investigators obtained reference samples from 28 men who had some part in Stacey Stites' life. Acquaintances, friends, co-workers.
Not one of them is a match, not even her fiancé, Jimmy Fennell. So the police are wondering, is there some other explanation? What if Stacey had been cheating? Could that be a motive for Jimmy Fennell to kill her?
It was hard having the finger pointed at you. It was hard for them saying that, yeah, you killed Stacey, your fiance, that you did it because of these reasons, you know. But, you know, I kept in my mind that I didn't do it.
Bastrop County Sheriff's Office. There's a recorded phone conversation in which a woman calls in anonymously and claims her son was having an affair with Stacey.
I think Stacey was having a son.
mean, we've all kind of assumed that.
Who has a motive for this?
Well, at this point, the boyfriend does.
That's right.
That's the prime suspect. The person that we're trying to find is a liaison. For the longest time, we've had our suspicions. Okay?
The woman refuses to provide her son's name, although subsequently he was identified and he was ruled out.
And as the call continues, you can hear the investigators' frustration. It's been 4 months, and this investigation is going nowhere.
See, at this point, we're stymied. We've hit a brick wall. I have to look at Stacy Stites' mom at least once a week, every day, in the face, and it makes me not want to answer the phone because I know it's her, and I know she wants me to tell her something, and I have nothing to tell her.
We can see that Rocky Wardlow continues to look at Jimmy Finnell through 1996 as his investigation continues to go on. We can see that because he gives him a polygraph test.
One of the questions asked Jimmy was, did you strangle Stacy? Jimmy answered he did not. Another question asked Jimmy was, were you involved in the death of Stacy Stites? Jimmy Finnell stated again he was not. The examiner determined that Jimmy was deceptive in these two answers. Jimmy, in defense of himself, said that he was emotional, that all he could visualize in his mind was her lying deceased in the casket.
So it didn't concern you at all that he seemed to be deceptive on the polygraph test?
No. Nah, I think we would talk about it and think that he was just upset.
I think he felt bad that he didn't get up and take her to work that day. And,
So-
then you feel like if I had been there, this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
What was it that led them to eliminate Jimmy Finnell?
Because of the logistic problems. Jimmy's truck was found in Bastrop, and he was home in Giddings, which is some 30 miles away. And so that was the problem, is that law enforcement could never make it make any sense that Jimmy had any involvement in this because they couldn't figure out how he ever could have gotten back home.
Unless he had a friend who might have given him a ride.
The investigators, the Texas Rangers, explored the possibility that somehow maybe someone had helped him and they could never find anything or anybody that credibly could have helped him. They looked at the mileage on the different patrol vehicles there at Giddings PD where he worked to see if there was any of those that were off, and there weren't. They looked at whether there were bus fares for people that night, and there weren't any. They looked at cab fares to see if there was some way he could have taken a cab.
Jimmy Finnell himself has always insisted that he is innocent.
They thoroughly vetted all the evidence they had, and they cleared him.
It was only after they matched the DNA to somebody that they dropped Jimmy as a suspect.
Another woman is violently attacked, and this woman lives. And her case is about to change everything.
I'm one of the investigators on the Stacy Stites murder. Do you even know who she is?
Stacy's murder goes unsolved for nearly a year. The cops are ostensibly looking at Jimmy and maybe in a couple other directions, but nothing's really happening.
1996 was an election year. Richard Hernandez won the position of the Bastrop County Sheriff. Hernandez announced that he would solve the murder of Stacy Stites within 6 months of taking office.
Richard Hernandez seizes on the Stites case, and this investigation begins to speed up. Wardlow is looking for a DNA match. That's the smoking gun.
Linda Schluter was another woman who was about 19 who had been abducted and beaten.
Linda Schluter was at this payphone in Bastrop, and there's a man who's kind of bothering her.
And he picked up the payphone next to the payphone I was on. He proceeded to ask me if he could get a ride. And he said, "I'm gonna freeze to death." I felt bad. So I said, fine, I'll give you a ride. Once we took a ride on Main Street, he started to get out, and he got back in really quick, and he said, don't I get a hug? And the next thing I know, he grabs me by the back of my hair with his left hand and proceeds to slam my face into my steering wheel.
There's an incredible fight happening in the car. She basically gets away, and this guy takes her car and drives and then sort of crash abandons it somewhere down the road.
Deputies arrived, took her into Bastrop. They photographed her injuries. They took a statement.
I described the man that I gave a ride to. The police automatically knew who he was. They presented 6 African Americans on a piece of paper. This is the one who attacked me. The police told me that his name was Rodney Reed.
Mr. Reed was arrested, and later he was released without posting a bond. He was just released.
The way in which Linda Schluter was attacked really lent itself to the police narrative of how Stacey Stites was attacked.
Rodney Reed surfaced as a suspect wholly and exclusively because he tried to abduct Linda 6 months after Stacey's murder, and a detective told the ranger about the case, and the ranger said, "Oh my God, that sounds like the Stites case."
Rocky Wardlow, the lead investigator from the Texas Rangers, he's wondering, do we have Rodney Reed's DNA on file? And it turns out they did have a sample of Rodney Reed's DNA in the system.
Because he had been involved with a woman in 1995 in some sort of a relationship.
And she alleged that Rodney Reed had sexually assaulted her in her apartment. I responded and conducted a crime scene investigation.
She ultimately declines to pursue charges against Reed, and that case is kind of dropped, but the police retain this biological evidence.
Texas Ranger Rocky Wardlow, he requested that the serologist take the DNA off a washcloth and various other items collected in October 1995 and compare it to the DNA collected off Stacey Stites' body.
It was a match. They found that Rodney Reed's DNA is identical to the DNA evidence recovered from Stacey's body.
My name is Sandra Reed, and I am Rodney Reed's mother. Richard Hernandez, the sheriff, and the city police came to the house, and I knew Richard before he even became sheriff. And they were looking for Rodney. Rodney was not there. So I said, Richard, what is this for? Well, I'm thinking it's drugs. Well, look, Richard, I said, now, people know Rodney don't sell drugs. He's not a drug dealer. He said, I know, Sandra. He said, but that's what they got. So, sure enough, Rodney came home. And I said, well, buddy, and get you some warm clothes, because I'm taking you to jail.
So they basically get Rodney into the police station on a drug-related charge. But it all seems pretty much kind of a ruse in order to ask him about Stacey.
I don't sell no drugs. So what are we talking about?
Well, let me read you your rights and stuff first, Rodney, and then we'll get off into that.
Oh, so what we're talking about is different than with...
Yeah, that drug case, I just want to kind of push it off to the side. Of course, you know that I'm one of the investigators on the Stacey Stites murder. You're one of the many, many people that we have talked to regarding this case. Talking with you was really nothing unusual. What I want to know from you is if you know this girl, and if you do, when did you meet her? Have you ever met her? Or do you even know who she is?
No, I do not. I don't know what Stacey Stites. I've seen that stuff on the news and stuff like that, but I don't know that person.
Never dated her?
No, I haven't.
What I would like to get from you, if you don't mind, is a written statement stating that I don't know the Stacey Stites. Do you have a problem with that?
No, I don't.
And Along with the statement, what I'd like to do is, if it's okay with you, is to get a sample of your blood, get some saliva samples and some hair samples, so that we can compare that with some of the stuff that we already have.
I don't mind doing the thing, but I'd like to have a lawyer, an attorney, you know, to back me up on what I'm doing, you know.
Well, I understand. That's perfectly all right.
Okay. No, David.
Yeah.
All this here and this stuff here, am I being charged with something?
We'll visit with you later about that.
By the time the questioning is over, Rodney is charged with the murder of Stacey Stites.
He stated that he was afraid. He was aware that Stacey was dead, and he was a black male having sex with a white girl in Bastrop.
Stacey Stites was white. Rodney Reed was black. Rodney lived in Texas long enough to know what that meant.
Free Rodney Reed! No! Free Rodney! This case is about to draw big attention to the small town of Bastrop.
He has some high-profile names coming to his defense now.
And spark what many believe will be a long road to justice. You're sitting here with me and the clock is ticking.
To put them to death for something that they know that they did not do. I got to fight to save my son's life.
How do you tell your daughter, if you die today, I can never be more proud of you?
We know for sure, 100% positive, that Rodney Reed murdered my sister. We did not believe that Jimmy, her fiance, had hurt Stacey at all.
They cleared him.
An insurance lady provided an affidavit saying that Jimmy Fennell says, if you ever cheat on me, I will kill you and no one will ever know about it.
What did the state completely get wrong as far as you're concerned about her death?
Everything.
Morning, investigators charged 29-year-old Rodney Reed of Bastrop with capital murder in connection with the death of Stacey Stites.
When it came out that the person arrested for Stacey's death was tied to DNA, the citizens of Bastrop County would believe that they actually caught the killer. Rodney Reed was charged with sexual assault, kidnapping, and murder of Stacey Stites. With those two enhancements of a kidnap and a rape, where it resulted in a death, it became a death penalty case.
Rodney Reed, around that time frame, he was in his late 20s. He was fairly well known around town. In April of '96, he is doing some work at a Super S in Bastrop.
Rodney's achievements in sports were phenomenal. He really excelled in boxing. He was a contender in the Golden Gloves. But Rodney Reed also was a free spirit. He had some run-ins with the law. He wasn't a choir boy.
He had told me, Mama, I'm dating a girl and she's engaged to a cop. And I had warned him, Rodney, you have too many irons in the fire and you're going to get burned.
He said that they had a relationship, a consensual relationship.
There has never been any evidence whatsoever that there was any type of relationship. There's no notes, there's no letters, no phone records.
My son was arrested for the murder of Stacey Stites. I knew it was a lie instantly. I'm hurt to the core. And at the same time, I got to fight these people to save my son's life. I found a lawyer by the name of Jimmy Brown. He was a good lawyer.
I went out to meet Rodney. I knew that he initially denied knowing Stacey, and I asked him about that. Rodney stated that he and Stacy were having sex. Stacy would pick him up at various locations, one being the H-E-B parking lot. It wasn't boyfriend, girlfriend, it was purely sexual. He was aware that she was dead and that he was a black male having sex with a white girl in Bastrop. He stated, quite honestly, that he was afraid. I did tell the family, you're going to need resources to get experts.
Rodney Reed's family is not wealthy, and they're going to need at least $50,000 to retain an attorney. And very shortly, it becomes very obvious that the Reed family is not going to be able to raise the money.
At that time, in January of 1998, the court appointed Calvin Garvey and Lydia Clay Jackson to represent Rodney Reed.
The state had almost 2 years to investigate the case. We only had 2 months to prepare. We had numerous motions for continuance. The ruling was generally, I'll give you more funds, but never any more time.
The trial of State of Texas versus Rodney Rodell Reed. It started May 4th, 1998. This is arguably the largest case that Bastrop had ever seen.
Now, this trial has been front page news here in Bastrop, and a lot of the townspeople we discovered have already formed their own conclusion.
At that time, a capital murder case in a small town like Bastrop was unusual. There was also the racial component to it. African-American defendant, a white victim, and that raised the tension around that case in Bastrop.
I have 6 sons. Rodney is my 4th son. I have faith in God. This was too wrong. I have a God, and I'm believing in him, and I will hold on to my faith with God that he will bring my son home.
I turned it over to God because it all works out in the end and God's still in control. She had hopes and dreams, and he took that all away.
In the opening statements, the prosecution made it clear that the DNA was really the heart of their case. The prosecution called the DNA Cinderella's slipper, and it only fits one person.
This is DNA that was found inside of Stacy Stites that matches Rodney Reed.
The defense told the jury that they were going to provide evidence that Rodney Reed and Stacy Stites had a relationship, and that would explain the DNA.
In front of an all-white jury, prosecutor Lisa Tanner began her opening arguments and laid out the narrative that the prosecution would go with the entire trial.
That morning, Stacy Stites got up at 3 or so. She left her apartment to go to a 3:30 a.m. shift at the H-E-B. Her normal route to work was on Highway 21 through Bastrop, where she would go through the railroad tracks going into Bastrop. And Rodney Reed either jumped in her truck or talked his way into her truck, much like what he did with Linda. We believe from there that Rodney Reed raped her and strangled her, and then dumped her body on the road, and then put her truck less than 6/10 of a mile from his home and walked home.
Jimmy Fennell testified in the trial. He gave the timetable and the timeline of where they were, how much he loved his fiancée, and that he didn't kill her.
The state's key witnesses were Megan Clement and Dr. Bayardo. These individuals painted a damning picture for Mr. Reed. Dr. Bayardo took the stand and he opined on Stacy's time of death. And this time of death that he put was 3:30 in the morning.
And this was devastating to Rodney's team because it put Stacy in Bastrop at the time of her death. It set the foundation for the fatal blow to be delivered. Their most powerful witness in the name of Megan Clements.
Megan Clement was a serologist who tested vaginal samples from Stacy, and she connected them with the DNA with Rodney Reed.
What I was really waiting for was the testimony about this affair that they contended was happening between Rodney and Stacy.
They had one witness who said someone matching Stacy's description came to Reed's house, but she got Stacy's name wrong.
Other witnesses that we talked with, in large part, feared there would be retribution should they testify on Rodney's behalf. I knew we were in trouble.
Prosecutors are about to deal a devastating blow as they pile on evidence that will cripple Reed's case and his overwhelmed defense team.
It is a free-for-all. Rodney's defense attorneys were scrambling to try to get their ducks in a row.
The trial really seemed like the prosecution show. They had their DNA evidence. They brought out their specialists. The linchpin of the whole case for them was they had Rodney Reed's DNA inside Stacy Stites.
The big weakness in the defense's case was after they told the jury they were going to show evidence of this affair, they weren't able to produce witnesses to testify about it.
When the prosecution came over to the jury and said, the secret affair between Rodney Reed and Stacy Stites was so secret that Stacy didn't even know it existed. I think that really sold the jury.
After less than a day of deliberating, all of the 12 jurors came back unanimously, and they decided that Rodney Reed was guilty of the capital murder of Stacy Stites.
It was not an easy decision. It was very hard. There was a lot of pressure. We considered all the facts, and I believe that justice was done.
With 12 white jurors, this is something that you expect. Just like I said before, I had built myself up already for this verdict that they were going to give.
Since the jurors had found Rodney Reed guilty, now they have to determine what his punishment is for the crime of capital murder. And there's essentially a second trial. This second trial is to determine whether or not he is to be sentenced to death or spend his life in prison.
During the punishment phase, the prosecution can bring up anything about your background, prior bad acts, accusations, things that haven't even been proved in court, to try to convince the jury that you deserve death.
The lawyers for the state bring in unadjudicated rape allegations that they say Rodney committed, but was never charged with until after he is going on trial for Stacy's murder.
But the defense said they didn't have time to investigate the claims of any of these witnesses.
Among the witnesses who testified was Vivian Harbottle, who was raped 6 months before Stacy's murder in October of 1995 along the railroad tracks in the area.
It was dark and I'd been drinking, and when the police wanted to show me a lineup, I said no because I couldn't identify this person and I didn't want to pick the wrong person. I think it was like 6 months to a year until they called me in to say that they had matched the DNA to Rodney Reed. I had no idea who Rodney Reed was.
One of the other witnesses at the punishment phase was a young woman by the name of Angela Hamby.
Angela Hamby was a 12-year-old girl that lived in Bastrop. Sometime in '89, in the first week of September '89, she was raped.
That case went unsolved for years until the advancement of DNA, and the DNA that was collected from Angela Hamby was cross-referenced with Rodney Reed's DNA, and it was a match.
You also have the Linda Schluter case where the states decided that all of these additional cases were committed by Rodney to bolster the notion that he had murdered and raped Stites.
When you have witness after witness after witness coming and saying, the man who's seated next to you did these terrible things, taking a toll out of your client who's told you that no, he did not do that.
Convicted murderer Rodney Reed is on death row in Huntsville. A judge formally sentenced him today for the murder of 19-year-old Stacey Stites.
It's devastating news for one family.
They got to cap the murder out of the deal, and that's what they wanted.
So much. That's true too. News of justice and relief for another.
I'm really glad that justice was served and that the system really does work.
When he was sentenced to death, Deborah, did you have any doubt about whether this was the right person?
We haven't had any doubt at all.
No.
We know for sure that 100% positive that Rodney Reed murdered my sister.
I knew my son had been railroaded. For someone to put them to death for something that they know that they did not do.
Once a defendant is sentenced to death in a capital murder case, the state will pay for all of his appeals up to his exoneration or execution.
If you look at the entire universe of what has come up as evidence since Rodney's been convicted, you get a very disturbing picture.
While Reed is appealing his death sentence, some startling claims emerge from a Texas Rangers investigation into Stacey Stites' former fiancé, Officer Jimmy Fennell.
I just got raped by a cop. Okay, I need you to call. Are you there with him?
Rodney Reed has spent all this time on death row fighting for his life. But what's going on with Jimmy Fennell? Well, he's moved on to another police department up in Georgetown. It's north of Austin.
In 2007, about 10 years after Stacey Stites' murder, it appears that her former fiancé, Officer Jimmy Fennell, is under investigation by the Texas Rangers after a pretty disturbing incident.
My name is Connie Lear, and Jimmy Fennell was the police officer who had taken me and raped me.
October of 2007, Connie Lear is with her boyfriend at an apartment complex. So they've been drinking, they get into this sort of disagreement. There were some neighbors, and they call the cops.
The cops showed up, one being Jimmy Fennell, Jr., and separated us so that they could figure out what was going on.
The police end up arresting her boyfriend. According to police reports, Sergeant Fennell ends up telling one of the other officers that he was going to try and get intelligence from her.
The only one that was still there was Fennell. We were alone. And that's when I was asking, please take me to my boyfriend. So he took me over to the patrol car and he put me in the front seat. So we started driving. I started to realize that something was wrong when we pulled into a secluded park. And he came around to my side and told me to get out. And so I got out, and he took out his weapon, and he laid it in front of me. And then he slammed me up against the back of his patrol car. And then he jerked my pants down. And he raped me. And I didn't fight back because I was scared. And when he was done, he put me back in the patrol car, drove me back to the apartment complex, and he handed me a business card and told me that we were going to do it again the next day.
Connie ends up going to one of her neighbors and calls 911.
911, what's the address for your emergency? I can't. That is me.
Okay, what agency was the cop with? Was it Georgetown or?
It was Williamson County, Georgetown, Texas. I don't want you to come back here.
Okay, we're gonna send somebody out to help you, okay?
Why won't you drop me off?
It's gonna be a different officer to come talk to you, honey.
I want an ambulance and a red kit. Please stay on the phone with me.
Okay, I'm on the phone with you. I'm not gonna hang up, okay?
Only a couple of minutes went by, and I noticed spotlights. I saw the patrol cars pulling in with no ambulance. And the closer they got, I realized that the first police officer in line was Jimmy Fennell.
Okay,
Connie.
I saw him. He got out of his car. Now, please help me.
Okay, Connie, listen to me.
I have his car scrunched up in my head. Ma'am, this is the same cop who
Okay, do you see the ambulance?
There's not an ambulance, ma'am.
Okay, Connie, is there a female officer there with you?
He says there's an EM officer around the corner where Jimmy Fennell is. Jimmy Fennell.
And according to what one of the other officers wrote in his report, Sergeant Fennell tells an officer she's claiming that I raped her.
Connie says she was then placed in a police car and then forced to take back her claim that Fennell raped her.
And I looked into the patrol camera and I said I made the whole incident up. And after I was done, he said, okay, well, you're under arrest for public intoxication. Put your hands behind your back.
After Lear was taken to the Williamson County Jail, she called 911, and she got the attention of the sheriff's office and the Texas Rangers. A criminal investigation was opened that same day. Connie Lear was released from jail and taken to a hospital for treatment. The charge against her was dropped.
A few days later, formal charges were filed against Jimmy Fennell.
Jimmy Fennell Jr. now faces charges of sexual assault, kidnapping, improper sexual activity with a person in custody, and official oppression.
You know, if he got convicted on all of those charges, Jimmy would face more than 99 years in prison. Instead, he pleaded guilty to one count of improper sexual relations with a person in custody and one count of kidnapping. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison.
I mean, the mugshots of Jimmy Fennell make him look like a monster, but up close and personal, just a likable country boy. In no way am I denying that he committed a crime, because there was misconduct that he admitted and took responsibility for.
The DA never talked to me about plea agreements. That wasn't their choice to be made, that was mine.
After Jimmy Fennell goes to prison, it's discovered that he was the subject of several internal affairs investigations that involved allegations of sexual assault and misconduct.
According to police reports, he had this pattern of targeting certain women, and it seemed like he was really targeting women who were vulnerable, and he would use those as leverage to get them to do sexual acts with him.
Jimmy Fennell's defense attorney, Robert Phillips, told ABC News that authorities apparently thought so little of these extraneous offenses that none of them were ever prosecuted, nor did these women ever testify in court.
In Jimmy Fennell's case, he found the Lord after 10 years of hard time in a Texas prison, and he's trying to put the pieces together to create a new world for himself. Jimmy was never going to be police officer of the decade.
This is a person that is supposed to protect you. There's no 10-year sentence that frees me of the things that he did to me.
While Jimmy Fennell has done his time and is out on a new path as a free man, Rodney Reed is still on death row.
Rodney Reed's death sentence is not the end of the story. It's actually the start of a new chapter when attorneys from the Innocence Project step in to unearth a new witness.
She told me she was sleeping with a black guy, and I remember being completely shocked. She and I both, proceeded to say, like, wow, you need to be careful with this.
Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. Open the eyes of my heart, Lord. Open the eyes of my heart. I want to see you. Lord, I want to see you. I want to see you. See you high and lifted up to see you.
Well, I think it's pretty hard for an African-American man to be accused of raping and murdering a white woman in the state of Texas, be found guilty, and not receive the death penalty.
We have an expression among our colleagues in, the innocence movement. It doesn't take a village, it takes an army. How could you not be affected by a person on death row that you think the evidence shows by clear and convincing proof is innocent, right?
What I spend my time doing is calling individuals who may have information from that time back in 1996 who are willing to come forward. It's an enormous challenge. We are in a position now where 24 years later we're having to go out and try to speak to people and ask them about things they might have seen a quarter of a century ago. What I see when I am in Bastrop is a community that has progressed from that time back in 1996. I think the idea of an interracial relationship was something that was frowned upon in that community. I think that's changed. You might recall that the jury was not convinced that there was a relationship. This was a very damaging, even devastating part of his trial. Alicia Slater is a witness who worked at the HEB with Stacy, who has come forward talking about the relationship that existed between Rodney Reed and Stacy Stites.
In 1995, Stacy and I worked together at HEB. She told me that she wasn't that excited to get married because she was sleeping with a black guy named Rodney. To hear that she was actually having an affair was shocking to begin with. She and I both, proceeded to say, like, wow, you need to be careful with this. Being an 18-year-old about ready to graduate high school, I didn't want to get involved.
In a 2016 filing, the state contends that her account is patently unbelievable and that she failed to mention the secret affair when she spoke to police at the time of the murder. If Rodney Reed did have a relationship with Stacy Stites, doesn't that complicate your case?
Well, sure. However, it's awfully hard to find this evidence credible that he miraculously has this secret affair with this girl, and somehow his semen hangs around for several days.
Which science says it can do.
There are exceptions. There are no absolutes in science. That's why you look at all of the extraneous evidence as well in conjunction with just the DNA.
When you look at the actual police reports of the investigation, there was a lot of mistakes early on. One of the key mistakes from the first day, it is Murder Investigation 101 that you go to where the last person saw that victim.
Why wouldn't they search Jimmy's apartment?
I wish law enforcement would have searched the apartment. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that, it was okay. But I will tell you this, I've been doing this a long time, and never once have I ever had a case where I didn't at some point say, gosh, I wish law enforcement would have done whatever it is, X.
They were looking at Jimmy, but yet they turned his truck back over to him within a week.
After they had fully processed it.
But if they're looking at him as a suspect, why would they turn his truck back over to him?
Well, why wouldn't they? Forensically speaking, they did everything that was available to examine the truck forensically at the time. And so it wouldn't have made any sense for them to keep it. He needed wheels.
One of the challenges that I've had specifically working on this case is getting witnesses to come forward. The problem has been they're fearful. But we have 9 new witnesses in this most recent appeal. One of those witnesses is an insurance lady. She's trying to encourage Stacy Stites to purchase some insurance on her life. And Stacy sort of laughs and says, gosh, I'm so young. I have no need for insurance. And this insurance lady provided an affidavit saying that at that moment, before she can say anything more, Jimmy Finnell then says, if you ever cheat on me, I will kill you and no one will ever know about it.
One of the witnesses who has come forward is a gentleman named Charles Wayne Fletcher, the former member of the Bastrop County Sheriff's Office.
In an affidavit, Fletcher recalls Jimmy Finnell saying, I believe she is sleeping with a black man. Keep in mind, the way that Mr. Fletcher tells the story, Jimmy Finnell used a racial slur, and he didn't say the word sleeping.
And every time a new person comes forward, it's more colorful and creative than the last. I keep waiting for Mother Teresa to be the next witness from beyond the grave. It's just nonsense. He's not guilty of murder. He didn't do it, and the evidence shows that.
In its response, the state argues that neither witness is believable because they waited so long to come forward.
What did the state completely get wrong as far as you're concerned about her death?
Everything. They were like, oh my God, this is way off.
Rodney Reed has been on death row for more than 20 years. With just weeks to go before he was about to be executed, we traveled to Texas to hear his story. You're sitting here with me and the clock is ticking.
Yes.
You set to be executed?
Bryce Benjet and this whole team of lawyers have been working on this case and struggling so hard for so many years.
So one day I get a call from Detective Sergeant Gannon, and he had been looking at this independently. And he says, I found something new, and you guys got to hear about it.
This homicide detective pointed out what he thought was obvious. That was a big deal.
Detective Gannon.
So Detective Sergeant Gannon.
Nice to see you. You're former NYPD.
Bronx homicide, right?
Yeah. The state's case essentially was that she was intercepted on her way to work, that she was raped, and that she was strangled. What did the state completely get wrong as far as you're concerned about her death?
Everything. It was like, oh my God, this is way off.
What was way off?
Time of death was way off. It was hours earlier.
I give a lot of credit to Kevin Gannon because he did point to the key scientific evidence that really showed that they were all wrong.
And then when we take this to the actual medical examiner who testified, he gives us a sworn statement that said nobody should have relied on what I said.
Here's what the medical examiner wrote. My estimate of time of death was only an estimate and should not have been used at trial as an accurate statement of when Miss Stites died.
It's one of the great things about the system. In a way, you can go back to court, not as easily as it should be. If you can get the proof, you should be able to get an exoneration.
Family and supporters of Rodney Reed gathered in the Bastrop County courtroom today.
Rodney Reed's defense attorneys are trying to include forensic evidence from that 1996 murder that they say will prove his innocence.
Michael Baden, B-A-D-E-N.
Dr. Baden has weighed in on some of the biggest cases from O.J. Simpson to George Floyd. Reed's defense team brings him in to talk about the timing of Stacy's death using the science of lividity.
The lividity is because of the settling of the red blood cells in downward position. After about 4, 5, 6 hours, the lividity stays, and that's called fixed lividity. In this instance, there was fixed lividity in the front of her body,
not on her back as her body was discovered. That means that Stacy Stites was dead in a different position 4 or more hours prior to the time of that 3 to 5 a.m. window in order to get that way. All that shows that this homicide occurred hours before 3 a.m. at a time that she was just with Jimmy.
Now, you mentioned that there was other factors.
Yes, there was another, which is called classic sign of death, rigor mortis, which stiffening of the body.
After somebody dies, it begins to set in where the body stiffens and contracts. And that process begins and goes through a period of about 12 hours and then begins to slacken. We have videotape of the body of Stacy Stites being examined, manipulated, and put into a body bag. That video shows that she can be put into that body bag and her arms folded.
The rigor mortis was present but leaving the body. So this would put it about 20 hours, something like that, of death where the rigor has come, stayed, and then started going away.
And that is very powerful scientific evidence that, again, the time of death is way before that 3 a.m. to 5 a.m. window of the prosecution's case.
If she's killed at midnight and not 3 a.m., then Rodney Reed is excluded as the killer. So according to the defense's legal filings, the perpetrator then becomes Jimmy Finnell because he said he was in the apartment with her that night.
No, not based on any of the credible evidence or physical evidence or forensic evidence. It's a concoction of creative, brilliant lawyers trying to save a condemned man.
And the state argues that none of these methods establishing the time of death are totally reliable or have pinpoint accuracy. And Dr. Bodden agrees.
I agree with that, yes.
That concludes the hearing.
We gonna win, Rodney. Love you, baby.
The judge says the new evidence is not compelling enough for a retrial.
The judge said he rejected Bodden's testimony because it would not necessarily have changed the opinion of the jury, and that other evidence of Reed's guilt was strong. The court went on to say that Dr. Bodden never examined the body and that he based his opinion on crime scene reports, videos, and photos.
In the meantime, another court has set an execution date for Rodney Reed.
A state judge granted prosecutors' request to set Reed's execution for November 20th.
At this point, there is outrage all over the country about this execution. The national media has gotten involved. And in the middle of this outcry, I traveled to Texas and sit down with Reed on death row. You're sitting here with me and the clock is ticking.
Yes.
You set to be executed?
I hope not, but yes. I am holding on, not just for myself, but for my family.
The jury believed that you killed Stacy Stites. Did you rape Stacy Stites?
No, I didn't.
Did you kill Stacy
No,
Stites?
I absolutely did not.
How would you describe your relationship with her? Were you in love with her?
I couldn't say that I was in love with her. We were both in relationships. I was seeing someone else. She was seeing someone else.
So it was a casual, sexual relationship?
Yes, that's all. If I wouldn't have known her, if I wouldn't have been associated with her, I wouldn't be in this situation. But this is the situation that was handed to me. I have to accept that I'm here now for something that I didn't do.
Earlier this week, attorneys for Reed sent a new letter to the governor to ask for a delay in the execution.
What's on the line is pretty much everything.
We had unprecedented support from really all over the world.
Kim Kardashian West asked Rodney, is there anything that I can do to be helpful to this case?
Something's off here. Something needs to be done.
Free Rodney Reed! Free Rodney Reed! Free Rodney Reed! Free Rodney Reed! No! Free Rodney Reed! Free Rodney Reed!
They've
held dozens of rallies and protests.
We had unprecedented support. I don't know if it's social media coverage or media coverage, but just the closer we got, the louder the noise.
A rally outside the Texas governor's mansion.
Something's off here. Something needs to be done.
Breaking news this afternoon, Rodney Reed will not be executed next week.
An indefinite stay of execution.
A victory for death row inmate Rodney Reed in the fight to clear his name.
The hearing coming up keeps on getting postponed because of COVID-19. The one thing I'm very confident about is that the more you look at it and the more you look at the forensic pathology and the science, it's clear and convincing evidence of innocence.
Do I think Rodney Reed killed Stacey Stites? Yes. I do think that in our criminal justice system is not a perfect system, and that's one reason why I'm not a proponent of the death penalty. There is room for error.
I have no doubt about his guilt. I have tried and tried to figure out somehow that Rodney Reed didn't kill Stacey Stites. I can't get there. And I've also tried to figure out how Jimmy, her fiance, could have done it, and I also can't get there.
I have a son's life to save, and that's what I'm trying to do. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm gonna do until I leave. I have to hold on to my faith and stand on this truth and the facts and thank the world. I thank the world for the support. I have so much support, and God knows I thank the whole world. But leave me alone with my pain.
And what do you say to people who say that this case may be a miscarriage of justice?
I find that people that have not heard all of the evidence.
What upsets you most?
Trying to defend my sister. And the lies told about her.
While Carol's daughter was a teen mom, she made a tough decision to give up her baby girl for adoption. Stacey Stites' child is now a 26-year-old mom of 2.
My oldest is Stacey Lee. She's named after Stacey. I wanted her legacy to live on. She has grandchildren that she never will get to meet.
The only reason I'm doing this right now is I think we really have a shot of getting this across that Stacey was human and all she wanted to do is get married and have a baby.
Is it the building that's on fire?
It is, yeah.
It is, okay then.
I got out. I managed to get out.
Right then. It's okay. Is everybody out of the building?
No, there's still my partner in.
Right, is he able to get out of the building?
No, because there's fires near the door.
When the call came in, it seemed an unlikely town and an unlikely venue for this sort of thing to happen. At a joinery shop, after tea, when you wouldn't expect people to be working, things just didn't seem quite right.
Everybody was really quite worried. You know, it could have been the person that you walked past in the street, it could have been anybody.
I don't know how anybody could live with it, knowing that they burnt somebody alive.
Everybody was so shocked and everybody was locking up more and feeling a bit worried about it all because nothing like this had ever happened in the village.
A few miles from the bustling seaside resort of Skegness sits the small, picturesque market town of Burgh-le-Marche, affectionately known by its residents as the Village.
Everybody here calls it a village because we feel like village people. We're so connected and so we help one another.
Burgh-le-Marche is a typical Lincolnshire village on the edge of the Lincolnshire Wolds, famous for its windmill, where people are hard-working and just get on with their lives.
I've had a salon in Burgh-le-Marche for 14, 15 years and it's a lovely, quiet village where everybody knows everybody. Everybody gets on with everybody and my clients are lovely.
But the peaceful tranquility of the village is about to go up in flames.
We've just gone up to the workshop to to pick some things out.
Yeah.
And somebody came up at us behind.
Yeah.
And they attacked us and set fire to the place.
The workshop on fire belongs to well-known local couple David Twigg and Julie Dixon, who own a joinery business next to their home. As the emergency call comes in, Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Station Commander Gary Milson is immediately dispatched to the scene.
Once I received the call, I'd be straight into my car and making headway down to Borough Marsh. It's only a few miles down the road. There's not a lot of time to mull over things and get other information in. The information that was relayed to me at that point was that two men dressed in black and wearing balaclavas had accosted David Twigg and his partner. They'd locked David into the storeroom and then proceeded to pour petrol into the foyer of the building and lit it before fleeing the scene. As I approached the premise, there was a white picket fence surrounding it. It seemed quite surreal, the appliances at the bottom with the lights on. As I walked past that towards the entrance where the activity was taking place, the incident commander gave me a quick brief and said that there was very little fire and the fire was out, and they was now trying to locate David Twigg, who they'd been informed was locked in a room inside the building.
With the blaze having been brought under control and extinguished, Gary and his team desperately tried to locate David Twigg.
The workshops were an old railway buildings. They were long and thin, and at the end there was a small area with a kitchen, a storeroom and a toilet and a small foyer that linked these all together. And they were all involved in the fire. They was all black and heated and sooty, but they were all empty apart from the storeroom door that was locked. There was no keys present. The decision was made that the wall might be easier to break through than the door, and a hole was made in the wall, and we could see that there was somebody who appeared to be on the knees facing the door. We tried to rouse them through shouting and speaking to them, but there was no response.
With David not responding, the urgency to reach him grows and the fire crew break deeper into the wall, releasing the door.
As the door opened, David Twigg fell forward into our arms and forward onto the floor. The crews immediately turned him over and began resuscitation. We had an ambulance already in attendance and the paramedics were very quickly there, and we assisted the paramedics in placing him into the ambulance where they could work on him further.
In the back of the ambulance, paramedics battle to resuscitate David Twigg.
The time frame from the call to us getting David out of the cupboard may have been around about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we worked on him for probably another 15-20 minutes after that before the paramedics decided to call time and pronounce him dead.
With David dead, the situation immediately changes, and a murder investigation is launched.
The first information I got was that there'd been a fire at a business premises near Skegness in Lincolnshire, of course, and that two men had been involved. They'd made off, where they hadn't been found at the moment. A man had tragically died, believed to be the owner of the business, and his partner, who worked with him, a lady, had been quite badly injured in the incident. She was being taken to hospital to be treated, and officers were at the scene. So lots of things going through your mind, but at no stage anything other than, this is a murder case, it's tragic, David Twigg has died, and we need to find these two people as soon as possible.
With fire crews, police and paramedics at the scene, it isn't long before news of the tragedy spreads around the town.
It was a big event for Lincolnshire. A robbery homicide in a small village like Borough Marsh is something that had never happened before in my 25 years covering the area, and it may well never happen again.
Rumours I heard was they was looking for two men, and my house faces a back field, and of course the drones was going over there, there was quite some noise, and I couldn't believe it, actually.
The whole village were stunned that something could have happened on the doorsteps.
It was big news, and everybody was really quite worried that whoever did it could have been out there and they could have been next. You just don't know.
There was a lot of anxiety in the community. Borough Marsh is a long way from the nearest police station, a long way sometimes from the nearest police officer, and local people were obviously very concerned that they may be the victim of a similar burglary.
In the Lincolnshire town of Borough Marsh, police have launched a murder investigation after local joiner David Twigg was pronounced dead following a fire at his workshop. His partner, Julie Dixon, had managed to escape and call 999, reporting that masked intruders had broken in, locked David in the storeroom, and set the place on fire.
The impact on the local community after this happened was immense. That's the only way I can describe it. I was clearly getting phone calls. The local community officers were being stopped in the street. People were going to the police station. There was a kind of sense of not just why has this happened, but who's responsible, and just as importantly, is it going to happen again? Is somebody else going to be, the target of these two individuals? And nobody could think of a reason why David and Julie would be targeted.
David Twigg was an only son. He grew up in the area. His parents remained in the area. He was a master joiner, very popular and a hard-working man in the local area. He was also a very big man, well over 6 feet tall and 19 stone, but he was a presence in the community.
David met Julie in 1996 when she was going through a divorce. The pair quickly moved in together.
They remained together for 15 years. They came across as a typical middle-aged couple. In Borough Marsh, David and Julie were seen as a team. David was the carpenter, the joiner at the business, and Julie was doing the finance and the accounts for the business.
Outside of joinery, David soon discovered a new hobby, stock car racing, which opened up a whole new social circle for him and Julie, with professional racer John Mickle and his wife Lisa.
So from that very first race meeting, really kind of just kicked it off. We enjoyed each other's company. They wanted to come to every single race meeting. They wanted to be involved.
And David soon found a way to combine work with his newfound love when he set up a sideline alongside his joinery company.
As David's business grew, he was quite happy to sponsor the motor racing team. That was one of his passions, and so they undertook that deal, which was several £1,000s.
Julie and David were keen to promote this new kitchen bits and bobs business, which is an online business that they were trying to get off the ground. I think they felt that probably some branding on the race cars, and then obviously we can promote it through social media as well.
The sponsorship proved very successful. David particularly got on very well with the racing team, and they were invited over to America to watch the team racing, and all seemed well. It was a very happy relationship, and he got on very well with them.
I think from the beam on his face when we first, agreed at Liddon Hill, he just seemed incredibly proud. He seemed very smiley. You could tell he was passionate about his business, and this was something that he felt was going to enhance the people that would see his work.
The friendship between the two couples started to grow stronger.
I think from the very first time we met them, I really, really liked what they brought to the team, and, the energy, and we call it a race family, and it just felt like they were going to become part of our race family. Julie wanted to be hands-on with me in the kitchen, while David was very quick to throw himself into the deep end with John on the mechanic side as well. They just got stuck in. It wasn't just about the racing anymore. They started to get quite involved. She wanted to be involved in the family life that we had as well. She would buy presents for my children, who were aged 4 and 7 then. You know, they looked fondly upon her and David as well. So they became family friends.
And it was Lisa Julie turned to in the aftermath of the tragedy of David's death.
The very first time I heard about David was on Monday morning. I had a phone call somewhere between 7 and 7:30 in the morning from Julie. She basically was hysterical. She was shouting down the phone, "He's dead, he's dead." And I really didn't have a clue what she was even talking about. I didn't know who's dead. I said, "Julie, who's dead?" She said, David's dead. And I then tried to get some more information. You know, what's happened? She said, a fire. So none of her sentences were very long. It was just words being thrown out at me. I said, a fire? What? There's a house fire? She said, no, workshop, fire, masked men, attacked. From that phone call, I immediately knew I had to go and visit her straight away. I knew it would be a long journey up to Lincolnshire, probably 4 hours. I just grabbed my purse, my keys, and left. So the 4 hours going there was, it's a very weird and surreal situation. You keep thinking, you know, has this really happened? Is this some kind of, you know, is this true? Is it real? I just can't get my head around it. It's an awful lot of information, hearing her so upset on the phone. And those words, he's dead, they just kept playing and playing in my head.
When Lisa arrives at Julie's parents' house, she finds Julie in a state of shock.
Julie was sitting and rocking in a chair. I was absolutely taken back when I first saw her because she had burns on her face. She told me that her and David, on the Sunday, had gone down to the yard, which is just a short stroll from the house, to lock up. That's all they were doing. They were going to lock up. She said that she had asked David to go into the storeroom to get a light bulb. And these two men wearing balaclavas, dressed in black and hoodies, had come into the barn, had locked David in the cupboard, and then had grabbed her. And that they had tried and forced her towards this circular saw. I asked her how she got away, and she said, I just squirmed out of, she said, lucky I was wearing a hoodie. I squirmed out of it and ran. She said she ran out of the door, she ran across the field, and then I think after a short space of time, she turned round to look back to see that these intruders were also leaving the premises, and that they'd shut the door behind them. She was then concerned about David, so she went back to the barn. And when she opened the door, suddenly the combustion, the flames, that's what had caused the burns to her face.
While Lisa consoles her heartbroken friend, police turn up to interview Julie as a key witness to the crime.
She was only able to give some basic details. We didn't want to push too hard, of course. She's a victim, she's lost David in the most awful circumstances. Clearly the 999 call provided us with a little bit of information, which was helpful, but we wanted to try and dig deeper if we could, so we had to ask those difficult questions as early as possible. She was interviewed by specially trained officers, but sometimes it just wasn't possible to continue with interviews because Julie wasn't in a emotionally fit state to carry on at that point. So we had to do lots of short sections rather than a really long and draining and demanding interview.
With little information gleaned from Julie and unease growing among the locals, police turned to the public for help.
In the hours that followed, Lincolnshire Police made appeals for the intruders and did reveal that a 999 call had been made by Julie Dixon and gave the description of these two masked men who had been to the workshop, and that Julie had managed to push one of them away and escape, and then rang the fire brigade on 999.
I remember holding more than one press conference, which wasn't just local and regional, it was national as well, because this was big news in terms of what had happened and where it had happened and the type of community that it was affecting.
As Lincolnshire Police continued to make these appeals, we would take that information and circulate it amongst the various radio stations, local newspapers, daily newspapers in Lincolnshire. And the police were obviously very anxious to get that message out as wide as possible.
With Lincolnshire Police desperately trying to piece together the events of the night and establish the identity of the masked men, Fire Commander Gary Milson scours the crime scene for clues.
Once the fire's been extinguished, we then start on the scene preservation side of it. And as we withdraw from the building, we're trying to make sure that anything that has been removed out of the building is logged or is placed back into the building with care, so that should we need to, we can rebuild that picture, that jigsaw puzzle, to help us find out how the fire started.
I've dealt with quite a few fires, and unfortunately fatal fires as well, and murder cases, and it's probably one of the most challenging cases that you have to deal with, because by its very nature fire destroys, and fire destroys evidence, not just the fire itself but the water that's used.
Having established petrol was used as the accelerant, Senior Investigating Officer Stuart Gibbon begins trying to make sense of the scene.
All police officers and detectives are constantly reminded about how important the golden hour is. It's a time where you can lose evidence, but if you get it right and you gather the evidence and you secure and preserve that evidence, it can have a positive impact on the rest of the investigation. The golden hour in this particular investigation was kind of twofold. One was about securing the workshop to make sure that we could get access to it and that nobody else used it, and it could be forensically examined over a period of days, which it was. Also, from a financial point of view, it wasn't going to be a kind of random attack. That is something that I almost eliminated from a very early stage, simply because of where it is. So was it a customer that had been in before? And then you start to think about the reasons why. Is it financial? Is it a robbery or a burglary that's gone wrong? Did David owe somebody some money and they were trying to recover the money? So we drafted in a financial investigator working with the police, and he was starting to look at the actual basics of the business, how it was doing financially, what was going on.
Could David have been targeted for money? Was it a revenge attack for a business deal gone wrong? Or something closer to home?
So Julie did actually send me a few messages, and she called me quite distressed, probably a couple of weeks before David was killed. She did say that her telephone had been cut off, but then was restored again. She said that her electricity had been cut off, but restored again. She felt that someone was messing around with them.
Aware that this information could be key to the investigation, Lisa contacts the police.
So we had what are known as a POLSA team, police search advisor team, specialist search officers that did a kind of fingertip search in the parameters around the building. And actually they found something which appeared quite significant. Deposited in some bushes on a neighbouring piece of land next to the joinery workshop, they found some keys, and we were able to establish at a slightly later point that one of those keys fitted the storeroom that David had been locked inside. So this was quite a significant find for us. Obviously those items were forensically examined, they didn't yield any evidence, but the finding of those keys supported at that point the account that Julie Dixon had given, because they were found in the direction that the two offenders were alleged to have gone off in.
Further inquiries begin to yield some surprising discoveries.
I think the first kind of breakthrough in terms of new information for the investigation wasn't, surprisingly, to do with the two offenders. It was to do with the financial affairs, if you like. We'd been led to believe by the inquiries that we conducted that the business was in a good place financially, that David was doing well, and that the accounts were healthy. In actual fact, when we had a financial investigator start to look more closely at the accounts and the business, the opposite was true. They were in dire financial straits, on the verge, if not already, bankrupt, and there was some serious financial issues.
Having been unaware of the financial issues at David's business, further inquiries throw up more concerns.
the post that was going to the business was supposed to be going to David Twigg Joinery had been redirected to this garage. And that was quite a big point for us as well, because then that begs the question, well, why is the post being redirected? Who's redirecting it? And what lies behind that?
In Lincolnshire, the investigation into the murder of David Twigg has thrown up some suspicious activity around his business.
It soon became clear that both the workshop and the bungalow where they lived had been remortgaged.
Finances was becoming a little bit more of a priority line of inquiry, and we needed also to know why the post was being redirected to another address. We were still keeping an open mind. Obviously, we were still trying to establish these two mass offenders, who they were, where they were, why they'd done what they did. But also these other things were starting to kind of build up in terms of the finances, first and foremost, very, very different to how we'd initially thought they were.
While the investigation homes in on David's financial affairs and whether his death could be linked to a business deal, 2 months after his murder, David's body is released so he can finally be laid to rest. Friend Lisa accompanies David's partner Julie to the funeral.
That was a huge, big turning point for us. Suddenly my gut feeling started to take over. The funeral, she acted very strange for someone that was basically saying the last goodbye to a partner. She would crack jokes, and quite inappropriate jokes, acting slightly inappropriately towards people. She was laughing very, very loud. Then suddenly she'd be upset. It just seemed really irrational. And I felt uncomfortable.
But it isn't just friends who have their concerns. Having uncovered some financial irregularities surrounding David and Julie's business, Lincolnshire police have more questions.
Yeah, we were looking for answers to these questions, and the only person that really could probably provide them was Julie Dixon. I was conscious that we were asking her a lot of questions and being quite direct with her, when actually, on the face of it, she was a victim of the most awful circumstances. But we had to ask those questions. We weren't always given the answers that we were looking for.
As well as the finances, police inquiries with David's creditors flag up something else.
All the inquiries that we carried out with the businesses and the authorities that were dealing with this financial debt, nobody had ever spoken personally or otherwise with David Twigg. Every kind of communication, be it on the telephone, email, that sort of thing, was with Julie Dixon. And what we also uncovered, which was really quite concerning, was that people were being told by Julie that David was terminally ill, that he was abroad on holiday, that he was really unable to take any calls for various different reasons. And this concerned us because we couldn't corroborate this in any way.
Having also discovered the post addressed to David's business was being redirected to a local garage, Stuart and his team trawl through the garage's CCTV, hoping it will reveal who is behind the redirection. Instead, they find another clue.
And when we examined that CCTV, we found that Julie had driven there in a vehicle on the morning of the murder and had filled up petrol cans with petrol at the location. And when we did challenge her with finding that information in the CCTV footage, she told us, yes, I did go to the garage that morning. We were doing some gardening and I needed to get some petrol to fill the lawnmower up. We established also that Julie had a BlackBerry type mobile phone, and as part of a murder investigation you're always looking at mobile phone data because it can tell you a lot of things, and we couldn't get into it. So clearly we asked Julie on more than one occasion, could you please help us and tell us what the PIN number is so we can access this device? She was unable to do so. She said that she'd forgotten, she couldn't remember it. Clearly she had been using it very recently and on the day of the murder. We had evidence of that. If nobody else uses it and nobody else has changed the PIN or password, then she must know that number or that code. What's in that BlackBerry? Why won't she tell us the PIN number? We really desperately needed to get to the bottom of what had happened, and this was the point where the investigation focus really changed.
As the months tick by, friends of Julie also start to have their doubts as to what really occurred that fateful night.
One race meeting that I remember very, very clearly was the last race meeting that she's ever come to. When we arrived there was a police car there. She started screaming and hitting things, shouting at the top of her voice, making some very loud noises. And I just said, Julie, talk to me. What's wrong? Why are you upset? She sat, she rocked, she cried. She rocked, she cried. And then she started saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And I just said, what are you sorry for? Tell me what you're sorry for. She rocked, she cried, I'm sorry. And it was like a repeated process. She said nothing else, she did nothing else.
While Julie spends a weekend away with friends, back at the investigation, forensic evidence starts to build up.
Now, the account Julie gave was that the two men had come in, there'd been a tussle, she'd managed to get out of the place, and she'd gone to ring 999, and then she'd noticed them running out, the two offenders, and they ran off round the back, and she went back in to try and rescue David or find him, and as she opened the door, there was a flashback, and she was hit with the fumes from the fire and the explosion. And that was how she got the injuries. Actually, forensic evidence would say otherwise, and would indicate that it was what's known as a vapour cloud.
When the petrol would be originally poured into the foyer and lit, as the petrol's ignited, the vapour cloud would ignite first. And anybody in that vicinity would get caught in that vapour cloud, and depending on the amount of vapour and the intensity of it, they may just get slight singeing and flash burns, or they could indeed get quite badly burnt. That seemed to be fitting more with the burns to Julie Dixon than rather what she was telling us, that she would open the door and it flared up. In fact, we considered it quite unlikely that she had opened the door and the petrol had flared up like that. Once it's lit, it's done that initial flare up, and it's unlikely that would happen again. There was a petrol can behind the door. Had she have opened the door right at the start of the fire, she would have moved the petrol can, so that evidence didn't add up.
We also recovered from a forensic examination of the bungalow some very small hairs in the bathroom sink. Now again, on the surface, first viewing, not particularly relevant, but when we have those sent off to be forensically examined and we find out that they belong to Julie Dixon, those hairs, again, not particularly relevant, it's her bathroom, she uses the bathroom, there are going to be hairs. They were identified as eyelash or eyebrow hairs, but they were singed, they were burned. That put a kind of different slant on it as well.
Finding burned eyebrow hairs revealed Julie had gone into the bathroom after the fire had started, knowing full well her partner was trapped inside a burning building, something which raises suspicion among the police. Not only that, but the fire investigators believe Julie could only have received her injuries if she'd been inside the building when the fire started.
Julie Dixon had given various different accounts. She'd given us very little information. The more we tried to put to her by way of questions, the more withdrawn she'd become at that point, and actually became quite defensive at various times as well. And it was at that point that I made the decision, based on all the anomalies and the significant findings, she was going to be arrested on suspicion of the murder of her partner, David.
Three months after David's death, and news of Julie's arrest soon spreads around her hometown.
Obviously, there had been a lot of anxiety and fright in the community about intruders being at large. So in some ways, the arrest of Julie put that to bed. But equally, there was also some anger that obviously they'd spent 3 months believing Julie's story.
There was a lot of upset people. She had upset a lot of people because she befriended, well, she was everybody's friend. She was a very likeable person. And yeah, it was a big shock to everybody.
Julie Dixon is brought into the police station for formal questioning, this time as a suspect, not as a witness.
I was prepared, I thought, for most things to come from that interview, including a no-comment interview, which is quite common. So we'd gathered together as a group, the interviewing officers, the SIO, the interview coordinator, to discuss what could happen. But what actually did happen, I think it's fair to say, threw us all at that point. She provided a prepared statement, and what it said in a nutshell was that this whole situation had been a suicide pact. So what she said was that both her and David had wanted to die due to the dire financial circumstances around the business and personal issues, and that they were preparing to do just that, but that when the crunch came to lighting the petrol and setting the fire, she panicked and ran out of the building, leaving David behind.
In Lincolnshire, police are questioning David Twigg's partner on suspicion of his murder.
My initial thoughts were that if Julie was prepared to lie about two masked raiders and invent a story around what had actually happened, then what else had she lied about?
In interview, Julie claims the fire was a joint suicide pact, but that she had panicked and fled. So police need to establish if there is any truth in her account.
Let's go back and speak to friends and family. What sort of state of mind was David in? And actually, fairly quickly, it was established that he was in a good state of mind. He had no idea, we think, that the business was in such dire straits. He had no reason to die.
There's no way that David in his right mind would do a suicide pact, because he loved life too much and he was enjoying it too much. You know, the weeks before he got killed, he was down with us, enjoying it, planning the next year, the next trips, where we were going. He would never had that in his back of his mind. So we knew for ourselves then that she was bonkers and she had done it, and she was now trying to get herself out of a murder.
Suddenly, here we are. It's now a suicide pact. And who has a suicide pact but's locked behind a door that they don't have the key to, so they couldn't even change their mind if they wanted to? Poor David died on his hands and knees in a praying position, leaning against a door that was locked from the outside. That's not a suicide pact.
With time running out to hold Julie Dixon without charge, Senior Investigating Officer Stuart Gibbon consults with the Crown Prosecution Service.
So we clearly were very concerned about this prepared statement and just felt that it was probably another way of shifting focus. You know, we've had the masked offenders, they no longer exist now, so now we're going to go down the suicide pact, which is, interestingly enough, is a partial defence to murder, and if found to be true, could result in a conviction for manslaughter rather than murder. So that kind of made sense at that point. We had CPS working with us, so we could talk to them about the content of that prepared statement. They were already fully au fait with the evidence that we gathered that far. And the CPS lawyer was happy at that point that there was sufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect for conviction. So the decision was made to charge Julie Dixon with murdering her partner, David Twigg.
With Dixon charged with murder, police and CPS prepare for trial, and part of that means trying to establish a motive. Why would Julie want David dead?
The main strands of evidence, really, I mean, there were quite a few bits of circumstantial as well, the petrol and the redirection of the post, but the main ones were really the finances. You know, we found out that they were in dire straits. What I think is that it was getting to the point where a warrant was issued for non-payment of fines. The bailiffs were going to turn up at the workshop at some point. That is the stage where David would become aware of the scale of this debt, in fact the debt existed at all maybe, and Julie Dixon could then hold that back no longer. That was where it was all going to come to a head.
As well as discovering the couple were in serious financial trouble, police now had CCTV proving Julie purchased petrol on the day of the murder. But it's forensic evidence of a computer found in the couple's workshop which really helps build the case for the prosecution.
We'd heard stories that she'd been Googling stuff on a laptop, claiming that David had been Googling stuff. How do you commit suicide with it being undetected?
She was Googling on her laptop how to poison someone with cakes and how to get away with murder.
As the trial approaches, Julie Dixon changes her story yet again.
Things kind of changed a little bit again when Julie Dixon then started to say that it wasn't a suicide pact. Actually, David did want to die, and she was just trying to help him along, basically. So she's trying to remove herself even further from any kind of blame whatsoever. You know, it was David's idea. David wanted to do it. I just kind of helped him. Things had changed hugely since the first 999 call to the emergency services, but we felt we had a strong case. On the second day of that hearing, the not guilty plea, which had been entered initially by Julie Dixon, changed to a guilty plea, but she still maintained at that point that this had been all about David wanting to die. That's what the defence was putting forward, whereas our defence was cold-blooded, premeditated, pre-planned murder.
With Julie's shocking confession, the trial is halted.
Once Julie Dixon had admitted her guilt and pleaded guilty to David's murder, the role of the jury was no longer needed, but then falls to the judge to decide on what basis he believes her plea and on what basis the killing was carried out. So this is what is called a Newton hearing, and the judge hears evidence from all the parties in the case, and it's in the judge's role to decide how the murder was carried out effectively.
The prosecution lays out its case to the judge, and Julie's 999 call is played to the court.
The characters and set fire to the place.
So the place that actually set fire?
Yeah.
Is it the building that's on fire?
It is, yeah.
It is, okay then.
I got out, I managed to get
Right then. It's okay, is everybody out of the building?
No, there's still my partner in.
The phone call, on the face of it, sounded very genuine. She sounded distraught, she was hysterical, but actually the first information imparted was more of an account about what they'd been doing, like a rehearsal, rather than just saying, I need help and I need help quickly.
Over 5 days, the court hears how Julie's account changed throughout the investigation. From masked intruders to a joint suicide pact, to her assisting David in his own bid to take his own life.
The defence argued, once Julie Dixon had pleaded guilty, that matters had spiralled out of control, and that in some ways this had been an emotional response from Julie Dixon, almost that she had panicked because of the financial difficulties she got into. However, I think from the prosecution's point of view, and certainly from the police point of view, this was a perpetrator who had changed her accounts whenever it had suited her, whenever she had been confronted with new evidence. There was always a line of defence. So it's hard not to see her really as a very skillful and manipulative liar.
Julie Dixon didn't take the stand at all, didn't give evidence, was again very impassive, didn't present any emotion at any stage of the court proceedings, merely sat in the dock and appeared to be listening to the proceedings.
The extent of the couple's financial difficulties is revealed to the judge.
David wouldn't have had a clue about that bankruptcy. He was quite happy going about his everyday business. I think if he had found out that he had been declared bankrupt, he would have been incredibly upset, being such a proud man. So, yeah, she obviously kept that from him. And I can't see that those finances would have been enough for anyone to lose their life over.
At the end of that hearing, Judge Heath had to decide whose account he believed. And he came firmly down on David Twigg's side and said that he in no way believed that David Twigg had wanted to commit suicide, and he described Julie Dixon's account as a pack of lies.
The judge was quite damning in his comments and quite clear that he thought it was a cold-blooded murder and that, you know, she'd been kind of playing the part, and it was potentially worthy of an Oscar nomination if it hadn't been so sad and so true.
Julie Dixon is sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years for the murder of David Twigg. 11 years on, he is still remembered fondly.
No sentence can ever bring back a loved one. It will never be enough, of course, and it will never bring David back. But I just hope it brings some little comfort to the loved ones and those who loved David so much.
It just beggars belief that anyone would do that to another human being, a living person, someone you're supposed to care about, your partner. It's just incredibly difficult to understand how anyone would do that.
I think the harder thing is to wrap your head around is the way she calculated it, how she planned it all. What else was she planning? What else was she thinking? They say it's down to money. We'll never know. Obviously, she don't care about anybody because obviously she did what she did. So no one will ever know what's going through her head.
This investigation in this case impacted hugely on the community and the village of Burla Marsh. You know, people aren't going to forget what happened. It lives with them forever, and whenever the name of the village is sometimes mentioned, people will talk about this case. I know I certainly will never forget it.